We have the two major party nominees for the 8th Congressional District race. Congressman Bill Posey, a Republican, and Democrat Gabriel Rothblatt, who is the challenger in this race. Mr. Rothblatt, if you've watched these before, you know that we have a couple of questions we go through with candidates we have not interviewed before. We've interviewed Congressman Posey in the past. So I'm going to ask the questions of you since this is your first time in here. Have you been arrested before?
I had a warrant served for my arrest in Birmingham, Alabama, unjustly. I was a repossession agent, and the city of Birmingham decided that I needed to be prosecuted for criminal trespassing in the second degree. The DA refused to drop the case, even though we had all the appropriate paperwork showing that the order was live, the address was correct. I stood trial, and I fortunately won the case, although it was the popular perception of attorneys in the area that the judge, who normally would have sat on that case, just sees his position as an opportunity for revenue for the county. Fortunately, I got a different judge who was willing to hear the facts in the case and ruled in my favor in that case.
Okay. So that's it. Anything?
When I was 17, I was arrested for possession of marijuana.
Okay. And what was the outcome of that case?
Expunged from my record.
Okay. Have you ever declared bankruptcy?
No, I have not.
Okay. All right. Let's start now with Congressman Posey. What do you consider your biggest accomplishments from this past term in Congress?
Well, we had a lot of major accomplishments in the past term, but I think the biggest accomplishment transcends legislation. It was a significant change in the process. You've been aware and you've reported on the fact that historically legislation comes to the floor which members of Congress are asked to vote on, which they've never had the opportunity to read before. My personal perspective has been that if you can't give me a copy of legislation to read it, then the answer is automatically no. But there was no requirement ever to mandate that they make this material available. And I had tried for the past two terms to get that enacted into the rules. I filed legislation to make it a law. Obviously, I couldn't get support to do that. Finally, I got it incorporated into the rules that we'd have a 72-hour. I proposed a 72-hour rule. It ended up being a 3-day rule, which means it can be 48 hours and 1 second. But the legislation that comes before us that we're required to vote on must be available to the public for 3 days is what the rule says. And I think that's major. That's the kind of transparency and accountability that people sent me to Washington to provide. We had that in the House, as you recall, and in the state Senate, but we didn't have it at the federal level. And I think we need transparency and accountability at the federal level, even worse than we needed it at the state level. So.
And so was that the rule change? Is that something that has your name on it in the record, or is it?
No, when you vote on rules, but I mean, the record shows for 4 years I proposed this, and but they don't pass a rule like they pass legislation. It's
Right. Okay.
It was when we came in here. If you go back and look at the old interviews, that's one of the things that I thought was going to be very important. We had it in the state, like even in the state budget.
Right.
That thing's available for 72 hours, and you change 1 decimal point, you change 1 penny, and the clock starts ticking again, and gives you a chance to review it and read it and know what's in it. And we need that in Washington. This is the first step to getting there.
Mr. Rothblatt, why are you challenging Congressman Posey in this race?
I'm challenging Congressman Posey for a few reasons, and his positions and disrespecting the office of the presidency, for one, his lax behavior in the Congress is another, but ultimately, those have upset me. I believe that we can do better and that we need more. I believe that we need a representative who understands where the future is going, who has a vision to help us get there, and is going to lead people in the right direction, instead of just looking for the things that are already happening and assigning, his name to it at the end to try to claim some credit. We need someone who's going to step up and show America that democracy and our economy are still working, and my story is inspirational in that way.
You cited his positions bothered you. What positions in particular?
Mr. Posey's priority, the first thing that he did when he got to Congress, was not to propose this 3-day rule. It was to question the legitimacy of the president's birth certificate. It was to, and many of his positions highlight his misunderstanding or outright disrespect for the scientific process, and as well as women in the environment as well. Those things I find reprehensible behavior, and I believe that for someone who sits on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, that we expect better.
You also said his behavior in Congress, his lax behavior. What were you referring to?
Well, again, in his first term in Congress, that was just about the only legislation that he was notable for, and over the 3 terms in Congress, that we really do not have much to show. Of the 68 things that he's proposed, only 2 have come to pass. That's not an acceptable batting average as far as I'm concerned. I believe I can do better. Especially as far as bringing people together to find common ground, instead of taking every opportunity over 50 to thumb his nose at what he sees as a unacceptable solution when there's nothing else being proposed.
Before we get, I want to get back to the question of your qualifications to do better, but first I want to give Congressman Posey a chance to respond. Why did you introduce legislation that addressed the president's birth certificate?
Well, if you recall, in 2008, there was a lot of controversy over his eligibility, which began when Hillary Clinton questioned his ability to be the president. This was not the first time in the history of our country the president's eligibility has been questioned. It began with the 21st president of the United States, Chester A. Arthur, who is alleged to have been born in Canada in days before we had birth certificates available. Charles Curtis, the vice president under Herbert Hoover, was born in Kansas when it was a territory, not a state. You go on to Barry Goldwater. Mitt Romney's father, George, was born in Mexico. As recently as John McCain, having been born in the Panama Canal Zone, the president himself, at the time a U.S. Senator, thought that was important enough to question. He was one of 3 on the Senate Homeland Security Committee who had a special committee hearing to determine if the president was eligible, or if McCain was eligible to have his name on the ballot. So then comes the controversy about President Obama's eligibility. I try and use common sense and common values in what I do. So this is like the 9th time there's a controversy about this, and it's a bitter controversy. And so you think, how do you put this controversy to bed? The bill did not, as Mr. Rothblatt claimed, question the eligibility of President Obama. It said in the future, in presidential elections, we will not have this arise a 10th or 11th or 12th times and have all this acrimony. We will establish a procedure for eliminating that question in the future. A lot of people have given me credit for trying to do something that was negative toward the president, when in fact the only person that was negative toward the president about it was Hillary Clinton, who brought the issue up in the first place, and that's where I first heard about it. Accomplishments, I can give you a couple pages of accomplishments of legislation we've passed, but you know, I don't cause acrimony. Most of the legislation I've sponsored bills up there. Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas is a co-sponsor of mine. Maxine Waters from California. Gregory Meeks from New York. Debbie Wasserman Schultz from right here in Florida. People say, well, how can you work with these other members? How can you work with those Democrats with you guys being so divided like that? And the answer is we look for common ground, and there are a lot of places where we have common ground. And I've always been a consensus builder. If you go to the Senate Journal, I think it's page 972, my last day in the Senate, the first 5 people who raise their microphone are allowed to say something nice about you, and the president of the Senate did. Now Congressman Daniel Webster did, and the other 3 were Democrats. Al Lawson, who was later to become the minority leader, and David from South Florida, who's a state attorney now, and Larcenia Bullard, the late Larcenia Bullard, she just passed away a month or so ago, unfortunately, made lovingly comments and talked about my bipartisan work and reaching across the aisle with them, and I have that history from quotes in the newspaper about Steve Geller, who was the majority leader, from the Lieutenant Governor Buddy McKay under Lawton Childs, talking about my willingness to get down in the ditch and actually do the work that a lot of people don't want to do. So, you know, it's a bad misrepresentation to say that, you know, I'm an acrimonious sort of legislator and don't look for common ground. I'm a consensus builder. I believe that's what leadership is. You lead by example, and I've tried to do that.
What about the question of priorities, though, that Mr. Rothblatt raised? Doing that so early in your first term suggests that it's a priority, or would maybe, given the political environment at the time, would raise a question of whether or not your priorities were really in seeking common ground or just kind of throwing a bomb at that point.
Well, a lot of the media chose to make a bomb out of it. But even, I remember one of the most liberal bloggers said, hey, I hate to admit this, but the guy's got a point. If we want to bring this country together and reduce as much acrimony as we can in the future, this is really what we have to do. And, you know, quite frankly, my chief of staff said, boy, you'll regret this if you do it. They'll come after you. They'll try and make you look terrible. And I said, you know what? I'm not here to worry about perception. I'm here to try and make a difference, and I'm here to try and do the right thing. And if the press crucifies me over this, then I'm crucified over it. But I'm not going to hide under the couch. I'm not going to crawl under the table. I'll face any tough issue head on. And you know me long enough, Paul. That's the way I am.
Are you satisfied at this point that President Obama is eligible to be president?
That's not an issue. He's elected. He is the president. I've never questioned the president's eligibility.
You wanted to follow up about your qualifications, Mr. Rothblatt?
Yes, and to add one point on that I think gets overlooked is that the questioning, even Bill Posey has said how relevant the timing was to that. I concur that there are some issues, that procedural work that needs to be looked at. But the timing is just clear. The benefit that he has received from his base has been so clear to the timing that was necessary. The question I ask is, do men or do women have babies? Is it his mother or his father that's from Kenya? And that's something that we really have to look at. And it just shows the disrespect for the biological and scientific processes from Mr. Posey. For my own qualifications, the Constitution of the United States makes it very clear, 25 years of age, 7 years as a citizen. That's the only thing that the Constitution is asking for. The state of Florida has some additional requirements to qualify for the ballot. I personally collected over 5,000 petitions from people throughout our district to get my name on the ballot. And that was from conversations, sitting down, standing in front of tax collectors' offices at public events, working hard in the same shoes I'm wearing right now to build that consensus, to get enough support within my community, and to show to myself and to other people that I'm willing to work hard all the time to get that job done. I also have an incredibly diverse story. I have experience both in the demographics of my life, in my education, and my work, every corner of human life, and that gives me many insightful ways to educate the legislation and the public discussion that we're having. I'm the black Jewish son of a transgendered parent. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. I've worked for minimum wage. I've been a business owner. I've worked in insurance and food service and fitness, in real estate, in nonprofits. You name it, I've done it. I come from a place that is the center of the Venn diagram, that I share something with everybody. I am not a partisan political puppet. I registered as a Democrat to run for this seat when I was so fed up with the fanaticism that Bill Posey and a faction of Republican parties represent here in America. I wanted to bring things back to the center to eventually get to a point where third parties have a chance to win office here. And that's one of the legacies I'd like to leave from my term in office, is to see the point where we have a more diverse and less polarized, he's a conservative, I'm a liberal, you're red, I'm blue dynamic that we have going on. And as long as the 40 years that Bill Posey has been involved in office, he's gotten very good at skirting away from things and saying, hey, look, this is a procedural issue over here. I'm not as partisan or as ineffectual as it looks, because there's a bunch of things that you don't see of what I'm doing.
We're hearing, excuse me, a lot about why voters shouldn't vote for Congressman Posey, but not enough about why they should vote for you. Now, you've mentioned that you've held a number of various jobs, that you hold management positions in those jobs. You have administrative experience in those positions. Because repossessing cars doesn't sound like a high threshold here.
No, I've always had two jobs since I was 12 years old. So I have an immense amount of work experience, far more than most people. At 32, I also have 4 kids, 10, 8, 6, 4, girl, boy. I have an incredible level of planning and experience that goes into my life to get me to where I am here, sitting here confidently being able to criticize the most powerful office in our area. What the question is do I need to have been a politician for 10 or 20 years for you to see me as willing and able to step up and do this job? And I don't agree with that position. I think most people don't agree with that position. America, red or blue, is fed up with the way that politics is done and wants to see something different. I am a trailblazer. That is my leadership style. I get up and I make things happen. I leave a path for others to follow me in that wake. It's a different style than Congressman Posey, and I believe it's what we need now, moving forward. Now, diversity is what I bring to the table. And that is something that is desperately missing from Congress, as well as from us locally here in our district. We have a severe problem with diversity dying in our district. And I believe that there's a tie-in between what happens in the environment and what happens in culture. And I represent an ability to bring that back here. Everything that you do in Congress, the legislation that you're passing, as well as the team that you're building, the community that you're building, they all have tie-ins to other things that you do in life and experiences. And the most important thing is not how long that you've done it before, but how many other people that you can reach and how many other stories that you understand. It's not enough just to hear people and then to say what you think that they want to hear. You got to be willing to actually listen and to take time to understand where they're coming from, even if it's not from your experience.
Congressman Posey, you told us about the rule change that you had been working on for 4 years before the House enacted it. What kind of priorities or projects do you have in mind? What are your goals if you're reelected to another term?
Well, the overarching priority is jobs, 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 jobs. I was the quote of the day, the quote of the week in Palm Beach Post one time when we were talking on the floor, and I said, unless you're independently wealthy, there's only 3 ways you're going to get through life. You're going to work, you're going to steal, or you're going to be on welfare. And if you don't have a decent job, you only have 2 alternatives. Now, it's important in a civilized society to have adequate education opportunities, adequate housing, adequate health care, obviously adequate diets. There's a lot of things that are important, but these are all put in place by people who have jobs. And so that's the overarching #1 priority. The second priority is our space program. We used to have 100% of the commercial launches at our launch area, and it's been parlayed into about 5%. While other countries have subsidized their space programs, we have basically run ours out of the country with red tape. It's important, I think, for the national security of this nation, for our technological advancements and education, and for ultimately the survival of our species, that we continue manned space flight. And to bring that along, I've been probably the greatest advocate in Washington. We have even established space advocates where my staff has got other staff working. Staff has an important role to play in Washington, and we realize that. And so we have built quite a legion of other staffers now that are buying into the space program and help promoting it. Third priority would probably be our Indian River Lagoon. I know it's not directly within the center of your readership, but it's important in our area. We have worked on ways to increase funding for research that will protect our lagoon, and 3 particular items, if you'd like to detail some, if time permits, I can tell you about. I brought a conference together of all the stakeholders concerned with the lagoon at Florida Institute of Technology, and tried to get everybody who has an interest in the lagoon on the same page and moving forward, agreeing on the solutions and moving forward with the same solutions in the same direction, and rather than being splintered and going in so many directions. We must balance the federal budget. The president's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said the national debt is the biggest threat to the United States of America. And I believe that to be true. We must secure our borders. I visited the southern border. Anybody that went there would be aghast at the reality of it. I didn't take an official tour with our Border Patrol. I went with a former Border Patrol agent who showed me some things that maybe you would not see on an official tour. Our border is very insecure. I had previously been under the impression that people crossing the border were coming here from Mexico looking for a future, a brighter life. In reality, so much of what crosses that border is related to drug trade, arms trafficking, and unfortunately, horrible magnitude of human trafficking. We've caught people from every nation in the world coming across that border, hostile nations to us, and we'll not have a secure nation until we secure that border. You want me to stop or continue to go down to priorities?
No, I think that's sufficient. Thank you. I want to give Mr. Rothblatt an opportunity to lay out some of his priorities if he's elected.
Absolutely. My first priority is going to be to the space program. The space program is what will bring us in our district the jobs, and it is my opinion, as well as many others, that Representative Posey well, he has advocated, has not championed the issue, and I can and will do better on that issue. It's also very interesting to hear Representative Posey begin to address the issues of the lagoon and its health after so long of being a denier of our efforts and of our human failure and the cause that has to the environment and its devastation.
Could you explain that, the denier in the context?
Congressman Posey is a denier that human activity is affecting our climate, which is, I mean, it's pretty well documented,
Right.
as much as he likes to, whisper that it's not. And I believe that people who take those positions should not sit on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. I believe that they should not be representing the most biodiverse estuary in North America. If they are not willing to take a very strong stance on environmental conservation, which Representative Posey, I believe, is an 8 or a 4% as far as environmental conservation ratings go. And it's not just in our district. I don't care where you live. He is one of the leaders in tearing down our national parks and opening it up for oil drilling and things along these lines. So the space program, especially commercial space development, right now we have a battle between the existing Department of Defense, the government monopoly over space, which is commonly known as old space, versus commercial development space called new space. And what especially the DoD and the old space really needs to understand is that the domestic commercial space industry is our national security. Without a vibrant and robust commercial space industry here in America, we are, which very quickly already, losing the new air war with other countries, and that is a necessary factor to doing it. We have to allow the resources that we already have in existence to supplement the growth of that industry. That is not just a national defense, but that's also a human sustainability issue. Because the technologies that we need, better solar panels, hydroponics, water purification, all these technologies that make our cities more sustainable come out of the space industry. And one of the, to his credit, listening to Mr. Posey say, what you need to do is watch Neil deGrasse Tyson as his vision for the future of space. Neil deGrasse Tyson also inspires me, but we need is a political and a civic leader to bring that inspiration to the people. And that's something that we've agreed on, something that I represent, and it's hard to see him fight back on me on those issues. But I'm happy to see that, particularly on space and the environment, that we have seen Representative Posey become more loud on these issues as he's being contested, on those specific issues. Another thing that's really important to me, though, is equality. That is something that we are fighting right now, particularly for women's equality and the LGBT community. Mr. Posey has also not been supportive of women's rights and autonomy, and he has also not come out to support equality for marriage of all people. And those are things, being the son of an LGBT family, I feel very particular about. Women are an incredible asset, and in our district particularly, they make 80 cents to the dollar that men make. And those are issues that we need to champion, and Posey in his last terms has voted against the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, and he voted against the Violence Against Women Act.
I want to give Congressman Posey an opportunity to respond in turn to those issues. First of all, on climate change, what is your position on that issue?
I have never, ever said, anytime, anywhere, any place, that human beings do not affect the climate. I have said on the record many times, even before I was in Congress, that our climate changes every day, actually, every year, and we've undergone various climate change cycles since the world was formed, and we will continue to experience changes in our climate until the end of this world. My interest in the environment is primarily to ensure that we have clean air and clean water. A lot of the anti-Posey sentiment over environment is because I am a little bit flabbergasted with the lawmaking by unelected people in Washington, D.C. And if you say that you're against overregulation, people automatically say, oh, he wants dirty air and dirty water, and that's not true. The grading by the organization that he referred to that gave me a low environmental grade, the liberals have their organizations to grade, and the conservatives have theirs to grade. I was graded low on that rating because I voted for the Keystone Pipeline, which I think is important to make us energy independent, which we must do. We can no longer stay reliant on countries who don't like us at best for our energy needs for future generations. I also have been on record for a long time that we need to look at solving our energy crisis through all the above methods. And that means solar, that means wind, that means ocean, that means all the above, and including in that is using the fossil fuels that we have underground in our own country instead of paying exorbitant prices to foreign countries who use the proceeds actually against us. I was downgraded in that survey, not because just the Keystone Pipeline, but because I voted against the national energy tax, known as cap and trade. And I right now, given this economy, do not feel it's appropriate to, number one, make every single constituent of mine pay more for gas at the pump, to pay more for their energy to run their household, and to encourage the shifting of even more jobs overseas because a national energy tax makes us less competitive domestically to produce goods and services.
So what, if anything, should we do if human beings are affecting the climate?
We should do our best to clean it up and be good stewards of the environment that we have. And I think we have. I mean, people say, well, we're never doing anything. We're never doing anything. And it takes a while for things to get, but, the recycling, like we started recycling, when I was on the city council. We stopped running our sewage into the Indian River, started planning to do that back when I was on the city council. It's just people are becoming, fortunately, more aware of it now. It's become an acute problem. And to say I'm doing nothing about it, I work hard to get the funding for our estuary program. And as it was mentioned, it's the most diverse estuary in the world. I work with Congressman Murphy to actually we've re-increased the funding for our lagoon. On that legislation, which has not passed the House yet, it's passed committee. We've got it in Congressman Labondio's bill as an amendment, which is how you have to pass most of your stuff in Washington. And it will bump up our estuary funding from about $500,000 a year to about $800,000 a year. I passed, and the Senate passed it, and President Obama signed it. A bill that I did with Congresswoman Suzanne Bomanici from Oregon, which will probably result in another $200,000 to $300,000 that we'll have for algae bloom research and how we can combat that even further. So, I grew up playing in that estuary, fishing, swimming, boating. I raised my kids on that estuary. I chose to, and both my kids are real naturalists. But I realized the value of it, and it's unfortunate that so much bad stuff has been allowed to be put into it, and the way we fix that is by stopping people from putting bad stuff into it. And that you start.
What about carbon emissions specifically, though? Is there anything that you would advocate to deal with carbon emissions, to limit carbon emissions?
Well, yeah, I think we should limit the carbon emissions to the greatest extent practicable. But one way to do that would be if nobody had any business operating in this country, that we didn't make anything, we didn't manufacture anything, we did nothing but sit around and study our navels, well, we would probably not emit very many carbon emissions. That you have to find a fair balance between man and the environment, and that's the eternal point that you seek.
So, well, excuse me again.
We didn't get to women.
Let's get to women.
You know, I don't have a son. I've got 2 daughters. With the exception of my father, the most important people in my life have been women. I'm fairly insulted when people say I hate women. It's just not true. And the bill they point to 2 bills. The first one is Lilly Ledbetter bill. I'm not for equal pay. Well, that's ridiculous. We have laws in the books. We have a constitution that says you can't discriminate because of race, creed, national origin, and we have
Equal Rights
laws.
Amendment has not been passed.
And we have laws in the books that say you must pay. Laws, statutory laws that say you must pay people the same, and there's plenty of case law on that where it's been in court and it's been litigated. Lilly Ledbetter, all Lilly Ledbetter did was eliminate the statute of limitations for such claims in the future. Like 50 years from now, if your secretary says, I got paid 10 cents less an hour than a male secretary did, now I want damages for 50 years that I would have had that. Well, you don't even have those records in 50 years. But, that again, that's all Lilly Ledbetter did. And the Violence Against Women Act, they say he voted against the Violence Against Women Act. He hates women. Like, that's dishonest, and that's a misrepresentation. There were 2 Violence Against Women Acts. One of them was filed by Congresswoman Sandy Adams, who both of you know, and Sandy herself was a victim of domestic violence. Now, what this act does, Joe Biden actually passed the original Violence Against Women Act, but what the act that we have before us does is talks about how the money is going to get spent that goes into the pot to combat violence against women. So we have the bill by Sandy Adams, which has been vetted. It's gone through all the committees in the House. It's on the floor, and it's strictly related to women, and it meets constitutional muster on a number of other issues that we may or may not get into. Then the Senate would not agree to that bill. The Senate sent over its own bill. The Senate bill was never heard in the House committee, came to the floor, and actually reduced funding for women. So, given the choice of which one you would vote for, I would assume that you would probably vote for Sandy Adams and would not have favored the Senate bill as well for the same reason if you're a member of the House of Representatives.
Quickly, there LGBT discrimination. There is a bill that would have prohibited discrimination based on sexual orientation and I believe sexual identity that has been in Congress called, the acronym is ENDA. Do you support that legislation?
Not familiar with it, actually. I thought right now you couldn't discriminate. And I may be wrong, but I've had legal advice saying right now you couldn't discriminate.
Can I get in there?
Quickly, and then
Yeah.
we'll go to another
Okay.
topic.
This is exactly what the thing that makes me so impassioned to get here is that we have a representative who lives in a world who doesn't think that there is discrimination against women, against other people, because he comes from a nepotistic culture that allows him to be outside of that. As a black Jewish son of an LGBT family, I understand the discrimination from every angle that happens in this country. And I'm going to fight passionately so that we don't have a Congress who is so removed from those issues so they can sit back here and say, you know what, I thought the Constitution protected all people. It doesn't. Florida is one of the states who has prevented ratification of equal rights from happening across the board. And again, I mean, this whole last 5 minutes has been procedural dodgeball from the issues. You go to Posey's office, he will tell you this: I would rather do nothing than do something wrong. You come to my office, he said, you know what, I'll try to do the right thing. Sometimes it's the wrong thing, but I'm going to do something rather than sit back and do nothing and while these problems get worse and worse. One thing that we know for certain, this is another great example of how disconnected Bill Posey has gotten from the future. I'm 32 years old on Sunday. My entire life is on Facebook and the internet. 50 years from now, there won't be a single moment of time that will not be well documented by camera, video, audio. And so to speak that, 50 years from now, we're not going to have a record of everything that happened, only exists in a world where you have been protected from the realities. I have 4 kids I'm raising on the lagoon right now. This is the first generation who's going to grow up not knowing what it's going to be like to play in the lagoon. When I moved my kids down here to Florida, that was what made me so angry, to sit back and to realize that the thing that Posey enjoyed, that his kids enjoyed, that I enjoyed, isn't available to our children. Now is the time for action. That's why we need new leadership.
Well, this is the time, I guess, we can ask this question, Mr. Rothblatt. For our viewers who may not have caught the Time magazine article on the religion of which you were a pastor, could you please give us a condensed explanation of what terrasim is? And if I mispronounce it, please correct.
First, the First Amendment prevents the establishment of religion, and I would really prefer not to bring religious ideology into a political debate at all. I am Jewish. I was born and raised Jewish. I still attend congregations, raise my children Jewish. Terasem is not a religion. It's a religious organization. It's a religious conversation that asks us to bring all of our religious beliefs to the table and discuss how technology fits into that world. Long time ago, the Catholic Church said, you know what, the world is flat. They denied that what we knew about the world because it helped fit into their worldview. The same thing is going on right now, where we have people, some of them, the groups who favor Posey 100% are this group of people who believe that America is a Christian nation, not a secular nation, but a Christian nation. That is the violation of the First Amendment that is going on very strongly right now. Terasem comes from the Latin earth seed. It is an ideology that seeks to see humans populate the cosmos. And there are roots in all religions that show that our religious destiny is to reach to the stars. Especially when you mix religious ideology with American innovation, this is the type of understanding that you get. One of the best examples is the Church of Latter-day Saints. An American religion that started and was brewed here in America. The concepts of the Latter-day Saints and the premises of Terasem are some of the closest bindings that we see out there. Our purpose is to reach the stars. That's why we want to go to heaven, because it causes us to look up. When you look up, you look to the future. And that is all that Terasem is trying to do as a group and organization, is to advocate for us to look to the stars and to reconcile our traditional religious beliefs with the reality of the technological world that we live in today.
Quickly, Mr. Posey, do you believe that the United States is a Christian nation?
No, I don't. I believe it's based on Judeo-Christian values, as many of the founders have stated. And I think a country without faith of one kind or another would not be as prosperous as us.
I wanted to get back to something that you said about being a consensus builder. During this past term, you voted against the bill that ended H.R. 2775, which ended the government shutdown. Your vote, had it prevailed, would have prolonged the government's shutdown. Why did you vote the way you did, and how is that consistent with consensus building?
Well, when you build consensus, it doesn't mean you change your principles. I've already stated that I agree with the President's former chairman of the Joint Chiefs that the national debt is the biggest threat to our nation's security. And the way our government is supposed to work in Washington, D.C., the way the budgetary process has historically worked until just recent times, is the President proposes a budget to the House. The Constitution says all bills for spending originate in the House. The House sends a bill to the Senate. The Senate doesn't usually buy it in the House form. They make a counteroffer. Eventually, they appoint a conference committee from each side, and they'll get together and that's the sausage making, they'll make the two unmatched as fit. The House, for the past 4 years, going on the fourth year, yeah, the House has passed a budget, the Senate has passed a budget one of those years. This year, for example, we have passed appropriations bills. The way it works in the state level and at the county level and the local level, you have a budget and everything that you do operates off that budget. The federal budget, you pass the overarching budget, but all the money is apportioned through appropriations bills, 12 separate appropriations bills that you have. The Senate refuses to take ours up. Now, I get a lot of backlash from constituents, and they say, how come you take $320 million of my money and give it to Detroit to reward them for their bad fiscal behavior? How come you take my tax money and you give it to enemies of this country? And the answer is, that's what happens when you don't have a budget. And so I thought we should have a budgeting process. I also oppose the sequestration, obviously, that has caused a lot of turmoil in this. And you must remember, while the House gets blamed for shutting down the government, it's the Senate who refused to take up our budget and appropriations bills, or we wouldn't have had it. The vote was about a CR. That's a continuing resolution. That allows you to operate at old budget levels plus and gives unbridled authority on spending. And I don't think that's good public policy. I don't think a majority of my people in my district think it's good public policy. And I don't think if you were in my shoes, you would have voted for it either, just to get it done and get out of town.
Mr. Rothblatt, your parents have founded and are bankrolling a super PAC that has been supporting you in this race. Super PACs are legally prohibited from coordinating with candidates' campaigns. How are you complying with this law?
Same way that we comply with any other law. You comply with the law. I come from a very bureaucratic family, a very entrepreneurial family. PanAmSat, GPS, Geostar, WorldSpace, Sirius Satellite Radio, United Therapeutics, many very successful organizations, have been started. Incredible wealth and job creation for this country. When I was 14, I signed my first lease agreement with my parents for my bedroom and my living and board. My father, also an attorney. We have a very bureaucratic family. I've been a shareholder in many of their organizations, in which case we've had the same regulations. I cannot speak, they cannot speak to me, I cannot speak to them about certain things going on in the business, or else I couldn't sell stock, it'd be insider trading. Now, if that's truly, the circumstance that just because the relationship is that close, we would have in so many different laws preventing other things from happening. It's tough, I will tell you, because we intentionally have to keep our small conversations very brief and to the point, because there is just a natural habit if you keep talking, things slip. So when we make our calls and have to discuss something, we keep it short and to the point. Fortunately, I've got 4 amazing grandchildren that, it's easy just to talk about, them and what's going on. And, my son just went in a chess tournament and all this kind of stuff. That's all grandparents that they want to hear about. There is absolutely no necessity nor need for us to discuss communication in the means of what's going on. I've said, many times, I would not have supported, if I was on the Supreme Court, would have voted for Citizens United. I would have, I will be a strict advocate for publicly funded elections and definitely getting money out of elections when in office. I can't control what other people do. And I would expect any of us, if their child, I know I do it for mine, I would do anything in my ability to help see my children succeed. And this is just another tool that is now, accessible, thanks to the Republican agenda, to allow people to spend unlimited funds in campaigns. So I mean, I don't know what else I can say. They can do what they want. It's freedom of speech. It's defined as freedom of speech. So they can say and do what they want. They can spend their money how they please. I'm happy to be a recipient of it. There quite literally would have been, an astronomical chance for me to overcome the access to money, access to power circle that Mr. Posey has. About 50% of his money comes from groups who only give to incumbents, who would never give to challengers. That's why it's so hard for a first-time or in a challenger to take out incumbent, because the largest circle of influence is reserved only for the people already sitting in power.
We're just about out of time. I just wanted to ask a quick district question of both of you, and we'll have to be brief on these. Start with you, Congressman Posey. All Aboard Florida. You and Congressman Murphy have asked the GAO to look into All Aboard Florida, and you've said that if a loan funding question comes before Congress for a vote, you'll oppose it. What are your concerns with All Aboard Florida?
Well, my concerns about All Aboard Florida is how it will affect the local citizens living along the route to have a train go through 16 times a day going 120 miles an hour. Latest news is they will not be applying for a RIF loan. They're going to do their own bonds. That's what I just heard this morning. So that's pretty much a moot point from the GAO at this point.
Okay. And Mr. Rothblatt, how do you feel about All Aboard Florida?
I completely concur with Congressman Posey's position on that. And I'm actually, this is the first I heard of the bonds. I prefer to see investments like that happen through that way rather than asking the government for loans. I'd like to see more bonds for public investment. I completely divested from the stock market and only held investments in municipal bonds, because I believe strongly that that method of investment in our culture is what we need to encourage.
All right, well, we'd like to thank you both for coming in today, and good luck in your campaigns.
Thank you.